So I might, Marcus. All right, we're gonna keep this train moving. I'm gonna text Marcus while we play Althea's promo video. So I have Tariq who is gonna cue up the video.
There's no sound.
When I got pregnant with my daughter at 16, I was told, like so many other young girls and women that look like me, that I would just be another statistic. I took this as a challenge. I graduated high school on time, then college, then graduate school a year later. Now, 15 years into a career of youth development and community advocacy, I spend my days challenging the idea that our children, our neighbors, and our communities are just statistics. There are mornings when I wake up with self-doubt, but I remind myself, this is not about me. This is about us. The Bronx is my home. It is the birthplace of hip-hop, Supreme Court Justice Sotomayor. It is a place of resilience and rebirth. It is a place of love and beating the odds. We need to make sure everybody is voting and everybody is counted. The Bronx is at a critical moment. And in 2021, we have a chance to use our vote to decide what is important to us. We deserve affordable housing. We deserve the right to feel free and safe in our neighborhoods without being over-policed. Our children deserve the same opportunities as every child across the city. They deserve the right to grow up and be productive adults regardless of their zip code. I'm running for city council to bring those demands, our needs, and our voices to the city.
It's time. It's time.
It's time to lift up our voices.
It's time to come together and speak up.
We demand
The Bronx that we deserve.
We deserve.
Our strength is in our unity.
Nuestra fuerza está en nuestra unidad.
This journey cannot be accomplished alone. I need each and every one of you. Will you join me?
That was cool.
So I just want to give a prerequisite. If you probably look at it like my social media are down and they're gonna throw the link in the chat. I apologize for that. I guess with the downloading the Wi-Fi, it was a little bit choppy. So someone please put the link to the chat so if folks want to see it, they can definitely check it out. But thank you.
That's right. Make sure you go on to Zoom and click the like button and click the share button. This has been a long journey. We started this journey almost 2 years ago, the campaign to get Althea elected into office. Althea has been in the youth development movement, working with young people and educating our young people. She has been a near and dear friend of mine, working on criminal justice issues, working on public housing issues. Anytime I call on Althea, Althea shows up, Althea is ready, and Althea is always accountable. This is the type of person you want leading in city council. And so today I have the honor and the privilege to introduce my near and dear friend. And without further ado, I'd like to give you our next city council member for District 16, Councilwoman Althea Stevens.
Well, thank you, Marquise. I appreciate that. But thank you everyone for joining us. I think one of the things that we definitely want to make sure as part of my campaign is to really have space where people can come together and be a part of the decision-making process, which is why we call this town hall Reimagining reimagining housing in our communities. I think that it's important that we have spaces and conversations for us, our community to look like. As we all know, we're all in a housing crisis, right? When we think about the issues that's going on in NYCHA, when we think about the end of this and so tonight we have two very dynamic speakers who are going to be on the panel, and they're going to be giving us some insight on some stuff that they've been doing and working on, and then also spending some time with you guys to come up with some solutions. Um, to come up with some solutions. Um, and come up with some solutions. But I do want to take a minute or so to kind of just talk about the platform, my platform on housing, because housing is one of my top issues that I definitely will be pushing for the forefront for when I'm in city council, if I am elected in June, and in the November. So one of my big demands is, and starting with, is NYCHA, right? Demand that there's larger city investments on the NYCHA side. One, I want to say just off the back, one, I do understand and know that the federal government for years has de-invested from NYCHA. So not only will be pushing for the city to invest more, but also working with my state and federal electeds to let them know that we need to fund NYCHA fully, right? We can't get into this place where we're saying like, oh, it's, we can't afford it and all these things, but then we put money into other. Big push of mine is supporting NYCHA resident leader with leadership development and on a quarterly basis, right? I think sometimes a lot of our NYCHA residents are literally, to me, our biggest and most powerful base that we could have, but a lot of times they're overwhelmed with things. So how do we use them as a way to give them leadership development so they can take on more, right? So for me, one of those things I would be pushing for is to have more leadership development for all NYCHA resident leaders, things on how to write a proposal, how to, do a budget, how to run a meeting. I think even during this time right now, when we think about how we've had to transition to Zoom, making sure doing Zoom trainings and helping residents get taught up and all those type of things. Support with rent stabilized laws. Like I said, working really closely with our state elected officials, championing pathways for low income home ownership. We all know, we hear this all the time, that we're talking about generational wealth and what does that look like? And we know that generational wealth typically starts with home ownership, but in New York City, a path to home ownership is like almost non-existent. So we have to get to a place where we're talking about home ownership. But the problem is we're all in a crisis just to rent an apartment. We can't even talk about home ownership. So, I think that one of the things we have to do is look at the housing market in general and fix that so that we can then start talking about how do we get people to start owning their homes. Also working really close with state and city federal electeds on getting our median income to be calculated to our communities. Currently, the way the median incomes are calculated, a lot of times the catchment areas are so big, right? For example, in District 16 specifically, we have our average income is about $26,000. But if you look at the AMI, which is the area median income for us, it's 40,000. But that's because it goes into Manhattan, and Manhattan boosts our AMI up. So we have to get to a place where we have smaller catchment areas that really reflect the people that live in the community. This is a federal thing, right? So this is something that I would literally have to champion with my state electeds to go to federal electeds to be like, we need to fix this. And this is something that I think is a huge problem for us, and we have to get this fixed. Another big piece of my platform is reforming the Euler process. For those of you who don't know, the Euler process is the Uniform Land Use Review process. And that basically is anytime there's any rezoning done in our community, it's a process that it has to go to. But it's this process that really doesn't make a lot of sense. Because it doesn't have real community input, right? So when you think about, it does go to the community board, but the community board is an advisory vote. Then it goes to the borough president, that's an advisory vote. And the only votes that really matter is the city council. And so I think, one, we have to be more transparent about these processes. And then also, two, we have to make sure we're getting in a place that the community voice actually matters. And I'll just go through the last couple of ones really quickly. Supporting HPD to extremely low income, but that's around the the AMI. But the last thing, one of the things that I really want to really talk about too is expanding DYCD and these homes for homeless youth. We have a lot of young people who are homeless youth, and specifically kids who typically age out of foster care. They become homeless youth, and we need to build more housing for them, and it needs to be supportive housing. So I think that those are some really important things that I'm going to be working on, and I'm sure that you guys have ideas. And like we said at the end, there'll be time for us to kind of talk and discuss and continue to add to my platform, because it is an ever growing and changing platform. And if you know me, you know that I don't like to talk a lot, and I feel like I've been talking a lot. So I would now like to welcome our two panelists, and thank you so much for being here with me today. So we have Lynn Lewis, who she will introduce herself. Lynn Lewis, she's a community organizer and oral historian. And then we also have Afua, who is the executive director of Community Voices Heard. Afua, I don't want to mess up your last name, so I'm sorry. Could you say it? Who's the executive director for Community Voices Heard. So if you, Lynn, if you can go first to introduce yourself, and then Afua, introduce yourself, and then we'll get started with our panel discussion.
Is this also, thank you, Althea, where you want me to make some introductory comments or just introduction?
Yeah, you can do both.
Okay, so hello, everybody. My name is Lynn Lewis. I live in East Harlem. I live in a rent-stabilized apartment. I've been here for 20 years. I've been working on the issues of housing and homelessness since the early 1980s. I have been homeless. I have been on public assistance. I am a mom. I am a grandmom. And my children, when they grew up, even though they went to college, were not able to afford to stay living in East Harlem. And so one of the, housing for me is very personal. And I want to really thank our future councilwoman, Althea, because even though I'm in East Harlem, not in the Bronx, I feel like we're kind of like two wings of the same bird sometimes. And my councilwoman, I see, just became co-chair of the Bronx delegation. And I think it's really important that our neighborhoods work together and that we fight.
My mentor, so don't worry, we work all together all the time.
Yeah, we need to lock arms and fight for what we need. And so I'll just briefly, I'm really grateful that you are talking about housing as a human right. A lot of times in this country, we fight for things like, education, things that are part of the Civil Rights Act, voting rights, but housing in the United States is not a civil right. And so often we don't think about it as something we have a right to. Too often in our country and in our city, it's like we almost feel like we have to apologize for something that human beings need to survive. And so we'll get into the details in the Q&A, but I want to start with the big picture. Homelessness is not about substance abuse or mental illness or people making mistakes, because people with money make mistakes and are substance abusers and have mental illness. Homelessness is about poverty. And the reason that we have hundreds of thousands of homeless people in New York City is because there's a big disconnect between how much money people have in their pocket in the beginning of the month and how much rent costs. And in addition to that, how hard it is to even get an apartment now because of scarcity. So poor people are fighting over the same apartments, right? We're all competing for the same low rent apartments. And I'm talking about low wage workers. I'm talking about the people that work in cashiers in the grocery store, people on Social Security, people on disability, people with VA benefits. And so as much as we want to talk about raising the minimum wage, which we should, that if the minimum wage went up to $20 an hour, it's not enough to pay for rent in New York City without serious subsidies. The Bronx has more homeless shelters than any other borough. It has more homeless children in the school system than any other borough. And so often when we think about what we need to solve problems, we think about what can we win. And I would like to invite us to think about starting with what we need and not what they want to give us. for what we think we might be able to get right now. Because of COVID and because of the economy, in a moment of crisis, like during the Great Depression, there were less resources, but there was a greater need. And there's a time, this is the time right now to think big. We'll get in the Q&A like I said before, so I'll kind of stop now so I don't take up too much time, but I look forward to dialoguing.
Thank you. Afua?
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name's Afua Atta-Mensah, and I serve as the Executive Director of Community Voices Heard and Community Voices Heard Power, where we have proudly endorsed Althea's candidacy. So really excited to be with everyone here today or tonight. And it's telling that Althea starts right with this important conversation being about housing, right? And that framing that Lynn referenced of housing being a human right. And I would take a step back and say that we are at a seminal moment in the Bronx, right? New York City generally, but particularly in the Bronx, where we are continually having to deal with these cycles of crisis, right? Pre-COVID, we know that issues of being able to live in full dignity in housing have always been an issue in the Bronx, particularly right now. And this, sorry, y'all, I'm handling.
There's no need to apologize. You're a mom. Hi, welcome.
Crisis and excuse me, in regards to true access to truly, and we say permanent affordable housing. And I live in Central Harlem, but I'm from the Bronx. And I'm thinking now of how, we've said outside of public housing, the Bronx is the last, thank you, last bastion of truly affordable housing. And I'm so excited to be in work with someone who sees that and understands it and is committed to a fight to ensure that the Bronx stays affordable, particularly if we want to talk about this at Community Voices Heard as a fight against hyper gentrification, and housing is a key crux of that. And now that we're sadly thrust into this crisis of global pandemic, with the Bronx being the epicenter for where it was hit, we know that housing is a crucial part of true public health, right? Access to permanent, safe, truly affordable housing is a seminal aspect to affordable, to us public safety. Please excuse me, all trying to parent and live and work from home in the midst of COVID. So please forgive me, but I will curtail my remarks for the Q&A as I bribe my child to quietness so we can fully get in. But Althea is so excited to be with you in this fight and to be able to have this important conversation today on affordable housing. And I'm hoping more people take your leadership of building a community plan towards housing.
Thank you. Well, I would like to say always, everyone knows that I'm a youth development person, so I have no problem with the baby being here. I'm here for it always. And we are mothers and we are people and we're all living in COVID, so it is 100% fine. And so I do want us to jump into our panel, but I do want to just share some stuff too. I'm also a mother, right? And I was a teen mom. And one of the reasons why I understand why housing is so important, I've been evicted. I am everything that I'm fighting for. I have been through these struggles. Like, I remember being evicted when I was 22 years old with my daughter and not knowing where I was going to go and not really having an outlet. And so understanding how that feels and making sure that it's just not necessary. But before we even jump into that, one of the things I've been saying a lot is talking about, like, we get so crazy around gentrification, but like, I like nice things in my neighborhood too. So how do we make this accessible for us? But when I had a conversation with Lynn the other day, she was like, we really need to think about another word because gentrification is such an ugly word. So something I do want everyone to kind of think about, right? What is a word that we can use to talk about our transitioning of our neighborhoods to benefit us instead of using the word gentrification? So while we're having this discussion and talking, that's something I really want everyone to kind of think about. And throughout this evening, my team is on here. They'll take notes, put it in the chat, because I think language is really important, and how we talk about how we want our community to transform is going to be important. And step one is us owning it and being the ones to start that change. So if folks can just start thinking about that, thinking about some words that, what does gentrification looks like when it's for us? Because it's not gentrification if it's for us in our community. So what is that word and what does it look like, right? So let's jump right into these questions. And it's no particular order. Lynn or Afua, you guys can just answer as we go. Very fluid and more conversational style. But thinking about, how do you guys think we got to this housing crisis, right? Before this pandemic, before everything, we were already in a housing crisis. So how do you guys think we got here?
Would you want to go first?
Sure.
I'll follow.
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Thanks. I have some moment of quiet, so thank you, moms, parents, for understanding. So I think clearly a host of matters, right? People overvaluing profit versus human need. I'd also say a lack of planning. That was what you're doing now, Althea, participatory, where it starts, right, where it should, with the first information point being with the people in community, both what they want and need. And allowing for those multiple levels of, right, the visioning of what's here now, what could be possible, and what's needed. So I'd say there's been multi-level failure in lack of vision and lack of planning, which really, if we think about it, we like strip all the excess verbiage. Is, you know, there's issues of economics that Lynn raised, but also I would say there's clear ramifications of race, right? And where folks who are thought to be worthy, who are worthy of planning, who are worthy of conversation that's not just about engagement, but it's about decision-making and self-determination. And the investment that doesn't, to your point, Althea, with, you know, gentrification being negative, right? But like, what is the idea of understanding that the people who are currently in place in the Bronx and in our communities all over New York City, being deserving of, to your point, nice things and living well in dignity. So it's the idea of these things coming into communities as we leave. And so how can folks maintain and live in dignity? I'd say the lack of planning wasn't by happenstance, it was intentional, based on the fact that I think some people don't think folks in the Bronx are deserving of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. I, in addition to all those things that you just said, because they're all true, city policies, we have a alphabet soup of housing programs in New York City that, as we talked about yesterday, Althea, are very complicated. It's very hard to have participatory planning, right? When you can't even understand all the jargon. It's kind of created in a way where it needs to be demystified. And I would say among those policies, for example, I walk around East Harlem, there's on 3rd Avenue, which is right where I live, there's a bunch of storefronts, 99-cent stores, supermarkets, whatever. And then upstairs are vacant apartments. And one of the things that I've done around homelessness and housing in New York is I was the executive director of Picture the Homeless for many years. And we did a report called Banking on Vacancy, because we started to say, well, that doesn't make sense. And then we said, well, if it doesn't make sense, usually someone's making money. And so we have people saying, oh, it's terrible, there's all these homeless people, but there's not enough money to create housing. Oh, it's too sad. And there's nowhere to put people. And both of those things are not true. So the New York City spends over $3 billion a year on the shelter system. And at the same time, it is totally legal for a landlord to leave a vacant building empty with 10 apartments, 90 apartments, what have you, for 20, 30 years. That's legal. And so we say, well, unjust laws are made to be changed, right? Sometimes they're made to be broken. And there's a lot of laws in this country that were bad. You know, slavery was legal. It used to be legal to beat your wife. Child labor was legal. So we have to really examine not what's legal and not legal, but what's right and what makes sense. And those are just two of the things that are bookending why we have a housing crisis, because housing is a commodity. People use it to make money, and it really should be used to support decent standard of living for everyone.
Yeah, I think we talk about it a little bit later, but I think also one of the things that I always say is just, we've made it so complicated. I think you touched on it. Like, housing has become so complicated where it's like, you know, the AMIs and the average, and you're like, wait, why is it a math problem? Just put people in apartments. Like, none of this makes sense. But so I love that you said that if it's complicated, and if it's this complicated, someone must be making money. And I think that is important for us to highlight, because I'm often just baffled when you think about the amount of vacancies in New York City,
Yeah.
apartment vacancies currently, even from the pandemic, because we had so many people leave New York, and we're still saying like we're in this huge crisis around getting people in apartments. So let's go to the next question. And I think this is a good one for me because I'm still learning about this, which is community land trusts. I hear this all the time that community land trusts are important and we need them. And for me, could you explain to us what community land trusts are and how we can use this to empower our communities?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Yeah, Lynn, you can go. I know that you were like the community land trust start and then Afua.
Okay. So Community Land Trust basically is a not-for-profit corporation that owns land. And generally, the model is that it has a board that's made up of three parts. One part are people that, 1/3 are people that live in housing on the land. Another third are people that live in that community, but not on the land. So that's 2/3. And then another third could be people that live in the city, but that might be housing activists or developers or have skills maybe that will help, right? That might not be already present on the board. Community land trust, the idea is that the land ownership is then community controlled, and it's for the purpose, it has a mission and bylaws, and so it's be for the purpose of being stewards of that land so that it's for the benefit of the community. So it can have housing on it, can have community gardens or urban farms or local businesses, what have you. The land use can be somewhat diverse, but it's for the purposes of to benefit that community. And so it doesn't magically in and of itself create affordable housing. And so we have a really kind of exciting community land trust movement in New York City. The oldest community land trust is on the Lower East Side. It's called Cooper Square. I actually lived there when in the early 80s when the city still owned the buildings and they were pretty much falling down around us, and the community organized to create the land trust. But it's what is on the land trust and how the housing is organized that can also make a difference in whether it's permanently affordable. And so you have things like in the example of Cooper Square and the East Harlem El Barrio Community Land Trust, multiple buildings that form a cooperative. So in the Lower East Side, they have 33 small railroad apartment kind of buildings that are in one larger cooperative. So they share bulk purchasing of insurance, bulk purchasing of heating oil, they share maintenance. And so it keeps the cost of operating the housing low. And so that's just briefly. I don't like to just say community land trust without talking about what goes on top of it, because it's not a magic solution, but it's a huge step forward.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Afua, do you have anything to add around community land trusts?
I'd just be brief. I think Lynn set this up perfectly in it. There's space and there should be, and I know Lynn and others have been leading on this, to push and work with elected officials, right, to invest. So the land trust is the first part, and to Lynn's point, it doesn't then magically sprout affordable housing. The next piece is investment that's intentional, that will bring that vision to fruition and allow for, right? So the land is the vessel to take away from some of the outside or the housing costs that is talked about, how like the cost of development that is talked as a hurdle in other parts of the city that don't have that land trust. But a crucial part of that is the investment to then allow the building of permanently affordable units. Then we would add that are designed for the needs of the community, right? So as opposed to some of this push towards everyone should live in like a micro studio apartment, that what if we use these land trusts based on what the community needs were for something crazy like, I don't know, 2 and 3 bedrooms. So that, right, the idea of building family and community and dignity.
Well, 5, because
I'm sorry, Althea, I had some technical difficulty there. I think I missed the last of what you said.
Yeah, no, mine too. It was unstable for a little bit. I was saying that we do have a lot of families who have large families who need 3 and 4 bedroom apartments, and those are like non-existent at this point in time, right? And so like, you know, you have a lot of people just doubling up. So I think that those are important as well. I'm thinking about it. But I loved your information about community land trust, because I think sometimes people say we need to just have community land trusts without all this knowledge around like the investment piece, right? I think that that was really important for people to kind of hear. Lynn, you wanted to add something else?
Just quickly, because your point about families is so important. And so the 4 buildings that, you know, we organized in East Harlem since 2014 to force the city to give us 4 buildings that the city owned. And, you know, the investment piece is lacking, but the idea was built on the Cooper Square model. They have 33 buildings. So if you have, like your kids grow up, you want them to be close by generally, right? When you're a grandma like me, like I was like not parent, but I was sharing childcare responsibilities with my daughter. They lived with me for 6 years. And if they had been able to stay in the neighborhood, we would have continued that. And so what they do in Cooper Square is they prioritize housing applications from families within the 33 buildings. A friend of mine became ill and she can no longer walk up the 6th flight of stairs. And because they have 33 buildings, they're able to move people around. So if families grow, they can apply for a larger apartment. If you get old and you can't walk up 6 flights anymore, you can put in for an apartment on a lower floor. And so that's a really important feature. It functions as a community, as opposed to the way a lot of like the homeless housing system works. If you're in a room, an SRO, and you get pregnant, you can't live there anymore. You know, if you get back with your partner or you get your kids back out of foster care, you can't stay in that unit. The way the shelter system is set up is really not how people live over time. And so we can design housing that way. And then we have to fight to make it happen. So to Afua's point, the investment has to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think also you bring up a good point around the shelter system, because that's like our next question. So a great segue. And Afua, I guess we can start with you. How do you guys think we can shift from a shelter city to a permanent housing structure? Because one of the things that I find is it's very much like, let's keep people in shelters, right? Like I have countless stories of people that I know and people that I've met who've been in shelters for years because they can't figure out how to get out. And even if they get out the shelter, they end up back in the shelter because it's just not sustainable.
No, great question. And I think it goes back to something that Lynn raised about someone's getting paid off of this. And I want to lift up a report that Picture the Homeless did about the business of homelessness, right? So if we take a step back on what Lynn raised, right? Like, as I said, I live in Central Harlem, where it has seen quite a change over the last 15 years and what rents could be. But, you know, there was a time, and it still happens, where a landlord in a unit that was previously rent stabilized, maybe as a rent stabilized unit, they were getting $1,200, right, for a family in there. Well, if on average the city is paying $3,000 for that same family, right, as a homeless shelter, they have now incentivized, right, short-term, non-dignified shelter housing at a high, right, or at that time almost twice the level than what it is for sustainability for a family. And so this has been seen time and time again, of this business of the shelter system. And I would say, you know, this is featured, this conversation is about housing, but so often there is connective tissue here, right? And it continues on these cycles of both violence and pushing away from the humanity of people. We know that in shelter systems that there is violence against people. We know that shelter systems, particularly for us parents who are on here, calls of child welfare, ACS, right? So there are all these different systems that intersect within the shelter system that are used to both as methods of control, methods to both harm and dehumanize, and I would say purposefully destabilize families, right? And, you know, while we celebrate and community voice is heard, and I know a lot of people on this part of this conversation put in a lot of work on the fight for 15, and the minimum wage should continue to be lifted. But in the city of New York, $15 an hour, you know, will get you not much in way, right? Like you'll probably be able to rent a room. So what we have here now is where the cost of being able to, for rental it's far outpaced what most low-income families would be able to afford without the benefit of subsidy. And so in that type of market where you may have scrupulous or unscrupulous landlords in this system where folks are trying to reach the homeless, the highest dollar, you are incentivized not to create a housing that meets the needs and wants of families and dignity, but to incentivize short-term delivery of a service, that theme of commodification, right? Before, a lot of organizations and individuals came together to organize, to push a strong package of protection for tenants through the improved for rent regulation, right? Landlords were able to increase the rent whenever people left an apartment. So it incentivized short-term as opposed to long-term community building, family sustainability. So you were almost, landlords had at that time an incentive to try and get folks out so they can get a rental increase. So these connective systems where there was planning that made it so building a family and knowing, right, and coming up and living in a community for 30 years and seeing change wasn't incentivized because that didn't bring up the rent. So I'd say that there has been a lot of, unfortunate is not a strong enough word, but I'd say harmful policy that has led to the perpetuation of a homeless system that's not based on care and love and dignity, but on profit and stigma.
Yeah, and that's a perfect word. The way that we think about, why is someone homeless? Generally, we think there's something wrong with them. Like even the people on this call, right? You get on a train and you see someone that's obviously homeless and there's an empty seat next to them, and there's an empty seat next to someone else that doesn't look homeless. Who are you going to go sit to? Because we have been brainwashed to think that there's something wrong with people because not just homeless, but poor, that they don't work hard enough, or that they're lazy, or that they messed up, or that they're a drug addict. And so this homeless shelter system is set up to rehabilitate people instead of thinking about how can we rehabilitate the housing market so that it reflects housing as a human right. When we think about things like systemic racism and the criminal justice system, we never talk about the housing system. We still think about it as like an individual. If you're in a nice apartment, you're successful, right? And so we don't think about all the different systems that go into making that possible or impossible. And to your point about containment and punishment and control of people. And I was even talking to someone last night who is doing research for a housing provider in Brooklyn, and they have to have a certain number of units for homeless folks. And so they are going to have a social worker work with them. And these are seniors and not the other seniors. And I cautioned her and I said, look, all seniors might need some help. Don't assume because they're homeless seniors, they need all this other help and the other seniors don't need any help. And so the way that we think about what needs to happen, there's a whole, even during COVID, remember, a bunch of us were fighting for the city to rent hotel rooms. So we had over 100,000 empty hotel rooms in New York City. And we had all of these people in Wards Island and Bellevue and shelters where you have a bunch of people in the same room. That's the opposite of what needs to happen under COVID. But our city, even though they will be reimbursed by the federal government 100% for having people in hotel rooms, is holding back. They've moved some people, but not nearly enough. And street homeless people, they're forcing them to go in the shelter system to be assessed and then placed in hotels. And so that's just a perfect example of, even though their lives are in danger by that policy, and again, these are policies where we have to control, we have to evaluate, we have to assess. And so we need to think about poor folks differently and understand that homeless people are a subset of just really poor people. And we need to create housing that people with the lowest incomes can afford. And until we do that, we will not have a housing movement that really is grounded in what folks need. And we will never have a right to housing unless the poorest people's needs are put first.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys, and thank you for sharing that, because that was a lot of good information just about our actual city being a shelter system. But we have another beast, right, that we need to talk about, which is NYCHA, right? Like NYCHA has been in crisis forever, right? And I don't think we can have a conversation about housing if we don't talk about NYCHA. And so how do you guys, or what are some solutions you guys think we can like approach NYCHA with around the crisis that they're currently in? I mean, I think, you know, all of you guys know that there's been so many proposals put forth to fix NYCHA, but every time we turn around, it's a new one. So what are some things you guys think we should do to kind of like help this solution? Afua?
So I wouldn't say solution, right? So here are a few things. We know that there is a money crisis, right? Like we have to talk in the world as it is as we push for the world that we need. But what concerns me equally is there's no conversation about the crisis of trust, right? And that crisis of trust has been well earned. Decades of people not just misperforming, but not performing, right? And so I think it's arrogant to put forth, right, for the administration to have put forth an alleged plan to save NYCHA without having a deep introspection and investment of how they improve their engagement and level of trust, which is non-existent, right? And so I would say that the way to move forward is with a deep humility and reckoning that there has been one thing that's been proven is a track record of mismanagement, right? Of treating people as less than human, as being able to you know, as sadly the public advocate has shown, of NYCHA being one of the worst landlords in the city of New York. And that's a stain on all of us. So, you know, some things that we say have to happen in public housing before they have any plan that requires people to trust them to fix it is they have to earn, you know, I'm just a girl from the Bronx. You got to earn trust, right? Like that's not a conversation that's had. So we think that NYCHA should do something crazy. All right. You know, we're going to make news tonight because that's the way Althea rolls. NYCHA should do something absolutely crazy. They should say they're going to do something, give a timeline for when it's done, and do it. I'm going to talk reckless, right? They should,
Crazy.
right? Break
blasphemy,
right?
I'm that kind of thing. I mean, where does that, you know?
I'm going to save the city a lot of money, and they should have just invested in Althea's campaign. They don't need any consultants. They should say they're going to fix a roof, say they're going to fix an elevator line, say it's going to cost, how long it's going to cost and how long it's going to take, and they should do it on time. NYCHA has to move at the speed of trust. There is no blueprint that's going to solve.
And be held accountable. And be held accountable when it's not done on time, right? Because there's no accountability. So it's like, hey, we'll say we'll do these elevators. Oh, we didn't do it. Now we need $10,000 more because we didn't do it 3 years ago when we said we was going to do it.
So we should say that, you know, they should be held accountable the same way tenants and residents are held accountable when that rent is late, is the same way that folks should be held accountable when the elevators aren't working, the same way they should be held accountable for leaks, the same way they should be held accountable for mold. So outside of how to do the investment to allow public housing residents to thrive, there's got to be a deep investment introspection in a management system that's proven it won't work. So they have to, and I would say, I'm not trying to make this as a truth and reconciliation commitment, but if we're honest, some of the things that have happened in public housing over the last 4 decades have caused people to die. And the fact that there's been no real humility about that, and that folks haven't had to come and have a conversation, and we know why that is where they need to start.
I would just flag two not little, but specific policies. So around succession rights, I know so many people who, because they didn't have succession rights, because they weren't on the lease, became homeless. And they were living in their family's apartments. So a good friend, East Harlem, Johnson Houses, he had moved out when he went to college and had his own place for years. So he wasn't on the lease anymore, even though he grew up there. And then his mom got sick and he moved back to take care of her. He didn't get on the lease. And when she died, he had to move, even though that's where he grew up. Another friend, when he came home from prison, he wasn't allowed to live in Johnson Houses anymore. So he and his children weren't allowed to live there anymore. Another friend had moved out of the city. She wasn't on the lease anymore and moved back again to take care of her ailing mom. So I think the question of succession rights and warehouse apartments in NYCHA. I mean, there's warehouse apartments in privately owned buildings, but NYCHA has warehouse apartments. And my understanding is that there's federal legislation that says NYCHA residents are supposed to be trained and hired to do those kinds of jobs, to maintain NYCHA buildings. And who benefits more from taking care of your own housing is the people that live in it. And so it's outrageous that we have warehouse apartments when people could be getting job training or already have the job skills to do that work, so that we don't have any empty NYCHA apartments.
100%, Lynn. And I would just add quickly, and then I'll throw it back to you, Afua. I think we're in a moment of opportunity where, given the change at the federal level, like, there should be a real push for infrastructure investment from the federal government that goes to public housing, to your point, Lynn, so that folks can get trained and do this work. And I think there's nothing better that can happen when we talk about a public works program, is to put New Yorkers who sorely need it back to work, rebuilding the last bastion of truly affordable housing, which is NYCHA, for the next generation of New Yorkers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything that you guys said is just like so powerful and so true. And I think even thinking about something that Afua said was just like holding them accountable and them being held accountable, which just does not happen. And I think that's the start. And also them respecting residents. I think that we often see how they're consistently disrespectful to residents. Whereas, like, when we even think about this blueprint, how it's being pushed forward without any input from resident leaders, residents, and it's just constant disrespect. And so I think the same way we talk about, like, with NYPD, and we have to build this trust, NYCHA needs to rebuild their trust back with the residents. And, you know, the residents are paying their rent and they're paying to be there. And so, like, they should have a say in their home. So I think it's really important. And I think it's starting with accountability, trust, and doing what they say they do, right? But we're gonna, before we open it up to everyone, I just wanted us to take, for both the panelists, to take some time to kind of talk about what are some bold solutions you guys think we can take to kind of address the housing issue as a whole. And then we're gonna open it up. We do have a few questions that's in the chat. But before we open it up to everyone else, I just wanted us to, like, end on what are some solutions we may think that we have for housing as a whole. We can start with you, Lynn, and then Afua.
I know CDH and a lot of other great groups were part of this new report, Right to the Roof. Somebody put a question. It's a great start. And I'll just dig a little deeper into one of the recommendations. So there's something called the Alternative Enforcement Program. And the recommendation in the Right to the Roof report is that buildings be added to it. So every year the city publishes the 250 of the, like, worst buildings. It's not worst landlords, but worst buildings. And this is based on violations. And so if you Google AEP bill NYC, it'll come up. And so for every year, 2021 is already out, 2020, for every year, there's a list of 250 buildings with the street addresses and how many units. And because this is how crazy I am, I added up all the number of units for 2021, and there was 4,600 something. The law says that that landlords have to make repairs, and if they don't, the city will, and bill the landlord and put a tax lien on the property. Now, right now, the tax liens get sold off to other developers who can then be slumlords too. And one thing that we have been saying in the community land trust movement is the tax lien sale buildings should go to not-for-profit developers who are working with community land trusts, because that's a way to put those buildings on a land. I mean, they won't physically move, but the land underneath them can be incorporated into a bigger land trust. And though that building, whether it's 10 units or 100 units, can be part of this larger multi-building cooperative, whether it's rental or home ownership, and you achieve this economy of scale, which means it's cheaper to operate it. We have failing HDFCs in the city, 10-unit buildings where 20 years after tenants buy them for $250 a month, like they used to be able to, you need a new boiler. And 10 people put their money together, maybe can buy a new boiler, maybe they can, and their maintenance costs go up. So there's all these kind of small programs that, if you look closely, affect tens of thousands of people every year. And I think that a lot of them, there's already laws on the books that need to be enforced. The Housing Not Warehousing Act, one bill was passed. It was something pushed by Picture the Homeless for 10 years, which was to create a registry. The city does not have a central database to actually track vacant properties. And the law as passed was wonderful, but it allows landlords to self-report. And so back to the words that we use, because words matter, participatory. You know, we could do a walk through your district out and count all the vacant properties. And it's very easy to find out who owns them and to have community conversations about what should happen with them, and then to fight for those things to happen. So
you
sharing
guys heard
knowledge.
first, Lynn said we're doing a walk through the district to look at these vacant buildings and apartments so we can see it. So you heard it here first.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm about action, so
let's
we're
do
gonna
it.
do it. And before Afua goes and talks about some of her solutions, I do want to acknowledge that we have Assemblywoman Chantel Jackson who joined us. I'm sure she just stopped in, but I definitely wanted to make sure we acknowledged her. And if she wanted to say a few words, I wanted to give her that. She said it in the chat. Hello, everyone. But she did stop in, and we do overlap in districts. Part 79 is part of 16 districts, so we do work very closely together, and she is the state elected. So just wanted to acknowledge her. She says she's here. So Afua, I don't know if you wanted to talk about some of your big solutions.
Sure, not the big solutions. I'll say just taking a bit of a macro, and then I'll dig in a little. This is a critically important time, right? There is the primary election in June, and because of the shakeup at the city council, right, this is an opportunity to elect amazing community folks who are steeped and accountable to community, like Althea Stevens, right? And I'm an organizer, I make no bones about that. So we believe in building power two ways: organize people and organize money, right? And so we don't have, I'm not trying to make assumptions about people's pockets. I'll say, I don't have the money to compete with the revenue, right? With the landlords and the RSA. But I believe through organized people, right, that allows for things like what Lynn was talking about. These land trusts didn't come because someone was benevolent, right? You only get what you are organized to take. So I think the most important thing we can do is join organization and organize together to be able to hold in love and accountability people like Althea who want to be held accountable, who want to co-govern and share an alignment of a vision about housing that's steeped in, not in scarcity, but in dignity, in sustainability and community. Because it's going to be folks in the city council who have power over land use, right? Who have power over rezonings, who have power over all these community planners who say they're for community, but no, you know, they couldn't find a grand concourse, right, with $50 and a map. So this is, I think, some of the most important things we can do when we talk about action steps is to come together and organize in love to be able to support candidates who don't see themselves as leading, but a part of, and want to move from that way. And that doesn't mean everybody agrees on everything, but you know, you can have intentional conversations in love and tension that's based in rigor and understanding of a larger movement is one of the most important things we can do right now. So that's where I'm putting my bet, organizing with Black women to change the city. So I throw my lot in with folks like Althea every day of the week.
Nope. No, we're working. I appreciate that because I stand on the shoulders of all the work that you guys have been doing. So I appreciate that. And it's something that you also said, and I mean, I was watching, I don't know about everyone else, I watched the Fred Hammond story this weekend. And one of the things that he says that I've been saying all week is, where there's people, there's power. And so for us, we have to understand that when we come together and as a collective, we are powerful, which is why for me, my slogan and my theme for my campaign has been, our strength is in our unity. If we are working together, there is nothing that we can't do, but we've often allowed people to divide us. So we need to continue to work together and build power in order for us to demand what we want and how we want things to move forward. And so now I do want to open it up to everyone. We did have some questions. And so just to be clear for everyone, this is the questions. We are not, I mean, they are experts. I will say I'm not an expert, but we do want, this is a time where people who want to jump in to answer some of these questions, please feel free, raise your hand, put it in the chat, but we do want this to be interactive. And so the first question that we did get the questions, but one of them was standing told that affordable housing rates goals.
Sorry,
So I guess they're asking like, how does?
I'm sorry, Chairman. Anthea, you kept breaking up. Can you say the question again?
Oh, I'm sorry. The question that was in the chat was, how does community land trust connect to affordable housing? I was previously told that affordable housing rates go according to AMI.
So a community land trust is just about who owns the land, right? And so AMI has to do, it's a federal designation that links the area median income, that's what AMI stands for, and then sets affordability rates accordingly. So they look at the average median income, and as Althea mentioned, for the New York metropolitan area, it includes Long Island and Westchester. And so if you have really wealthy people in an area, then their high wealth skews the average income high. And so in the Bronx, it depends on what slice of the Bronx they're looking at. It could create a false picture that the average, the area median income actually is higher than what most people's income is that live in that community, or certainly the people that need the most help. And so area median income drives public dollars into financing projects. And so if this is public money, this is our money. So even, you know, we heard Donald Trump and how much income tax he paid, right? And he got tax breaks for haircuts and all kinds of nonsense. Whereas working class people don't get those kind of tax breaks. So we're probably paying more vis-a-vis our income than rich people. And we're certainly paying the same amount of sales tax. So that public money should benefit the people that need it the most in whatever community we're talking about. So we can actually use community land trusts. I'll give you an example. To buy a property in Manhattan and probably most of New York City, the cost of the land is generally more expensive than the building, the cost of the building on top of it, the value of the land. If the ownership of the land and the buildings are separated, then we really only need to talk about financing the purchase of the building on top of the land. So not to get too complicated with it, but AMI is about financing housing and the ownership of the land is separate.
Okay, so just an additional question on top of that. If that goes according to like the, you know, the income for that area, my only question is that, okay, for the South Bronx, you know, everyone knows that this is one of the poorest district. And there's a lot of, we hold a lot of shelters and a lot of families that are on public assistance. So with that being, you know, if a lot of the people in one area pretty much have that for income, and how are these landlords or developers asking for 30, 40 times the rent? A lot of the places that they're building these new apartments, the people that's already in that community can't even afford to get in, including myself.
Yeah. So the landlords asking for 30, 40, they're asking for guarantors, they're asking for all kinds of craziness. That is a separate but also crucial issue that makes housing not affordable. And so that's an example of a city policy that can change. Maybe it's a state one, I'm not sure. I don't like to say things that I know for sure if I don't really know them, but that is an example of a policy. And, you know, I was invited to go to Berlin to give workshops about community land trust. And I was really shocked to learn that 95% of people in Berlin are renters. And so they have all kinds of protections like a lease for life. They cannot have a lease terminated just like that. There were all kinds of protections for renters. And I think there are models in the US and around the world that will offer us solutions to get out of this problem. So everything that we name, there's a solution to it. But you are right. Where I live, when I first moved to East Harlem, the area median income was like $28,000 a year. And buildings were going up where you needed to have 80 to 100% of area median income, which in New York, 100% is like 84,000 for a family of 4. And if you make $10 an hour, $15 an hour, what's your annual income? You know, it's less than 20,000 a year. So there's a huge disconnect between what we have in our pocket and what we're expected to pay for rent. And that's creating homelessness and creating the housing crisis. And then we blame the people that don't have housing.
Yeah.
I put in the chat box this, the New York City Community Land Initiative is like a network of community land trusts, and they do community workshops. And so for folks that want to go deeper, if you can reach out and talk to them, I'm happy to keep, sharing what I know, but those folks are actually doing land trust work in the Bronx and in every borough. And I'm sure they would love to be helpful and whatever it is that folks want to do.
I just want to.
Thea, you wanted to add something?
Sure, if I may, I just wanted to lift up something that was in the chat that a couple people commented on, which is true, right? Like they're just not building for the folks who are currently in that community. And I think that again goes to the importance of who are the elected officials in our community, because as developers come in and talk about, give the performance or the conversation about affordability, oftentimes those hurdles that people are naming off the bat aren't discussed, right? It's different to say to move in, you need to be, you have to show you're working or that you have some type of subsidy to pay the rent and that you can have first and last month's rent. But these things on the 60 to 80% or 60 to 80 times what the rent is in communities where average incomes are still $30,000 makes clear that it's not for the folks who are living there, right? So we see a lot of these added hurdles to accessing even the quote unquote affordable housing that are put in there, and I'd say that's also what stems or helps to stem this gentrification, right? Even the units that allow for rents under 2,000, if you have to show that you're making 100,000, right? Or have assets that, particularly in Black and Latinx communities where, not having a lot of savings and cash and assets are added hurdles that have a definite discriminatory impact.
Yeah, something else that I wanted to just highlight as well too, because you hear a lot of electeds and developers say like, well, we don't want to have concentrations of poverty. And, we have to get out of that because if there's concentration of poverty, that means there's going to be crime, blah, 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 blah. And my pushback is always like, okay, great. So if you don't want to have concentrations of poverty, build more affordable housing in the Upper East Side and in the Soho areas. Like, so you can't have concentrations of wealth and say that's okay, but then say we can't have concentrations of poverty because people still need to live places. So what is your solution to that? And then I even heard where folks were saying like, oh, well, we want to be able to have people who get higher education and achieve the thing to be able to stay in the community. It's like, yes, we do want people who have higher incomes to be able to, when you get a degree and and you're having some upward mobility. But at the end of the day, I'm like, we're not at a place where I need to be thinking about them. I need to think about people who are homeless and distressed at this point before we think about folks who actually have the means to move other places. We have another question, and I know we need to get to Marcus because he came a little bit late and we want to make sure we give him some time, but we do have some more questions. And I wanted to, like I said, everyone, it's open to anyone. So if you have some input, please feel free to unmute yourself and join into the conversation. The next question was, what is your understanding of Chairman Russ's blueprint for change? And do you see yourself as an advocate for the thousands of families who are being challenged with the blueprint and its process and changing the face of New York City? Afua, if we could start with you.
Sure. So I would say as an organization, we have many members who are NYCHA residents who are leading a NYCHA visioning session where part of what they're doing is going through a plan for us as an organization to proactively put to NYCHA. I know there are a lot of NYCHA residents and leaders who are on this call, and I think similar to what was lifted up by the CCOP and others, there's a lot of tension around that blueprint. And so I think it's 100% time for residents, for stakeholders to come together and put our own agenda or vision, our own plan for public housing that centers dignity, that centers accountability, right? And that fosters a building of trust and forces it. So I'm not the advocate for it. I serve at the pleasure of the membership. We're a member-led organization. I follow what they say. And I know many are not pleased, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone knows me, they know that I've been on the front line with NYCHA since the start of this. One of my very dear and good friends, Princess Jameson, who's on the call. Hi, Princess. She's been behind the scenes fighting against this since she saw the blueprint almost 2 years ago, and she pulled me in. And so I stand with the residents. Like I tell people all the time, the same way you said you serve at the pleasure of your members, I serve at the pleasure of the people. So whatever the people say, I will follow and make sure that we are standing and they're heard, and we will continue to fight together. Do we have any more questions? Let me see. I'm sorry about that. Curious to know, what are your positions? Oh, we already answered the right to roof one. I think there was another one. And before we go to the Satches, Mr. Marcus, does anyone have any comments that they want to bring up? Any solutions around housing that they wanted to talk about? Okay.
Caesar has his hand up.
Oh, Caesar, unmute yourself.
Yes, I am a member of Community Board 1. So I'm in the land use committee. So I've been seeing proposals for the last 3 years. And the main problem is HPD policy. That's one of the main issues. And they're also trying to redefine what a land trust is. So I'm concerned with HPD trying to redefine what a community land trust could do. For example, last week they came in with a proposal saying that they were going to have shares, they're going to have land ownership, and then they showed the income bracket, right? Supposedly, community land trust is supposed to be for people in the community, and it's supposed to be affordable for them in the community. But when they show the income bracket, they say, oh, this is what we put in, this is what we're gonna do. And then they use that blue over the income bracket. And then another thing that they did was HPD said that you needed to be in a lottery. It doesn't make sense, because in a lottery system, that means a large percentage of the people that will get those apartments are not going to be from the community. So why are you creating something for the community when you end up a large percentage of them are not going to come from the community? They're going to come throughout the city. So those policies like that is very important with HPD that you have to change. And somebody mentioned the area median income. That's a major issue again. Right now, the HPD was asked by the community board to provide data of all the affordable housing that has happened in Community Board 1. It has been asked 3 times, and HPD doesn't want to provide that. Why? Because they don't want to show what is the actual, affordability in the neighborhood. So I think that there has to be a push for HPD to be clear on that, and there has to be a push to change HPD policy. And the funny thing I would say is just a lot of these developers come in like, all I could do is affordability because this is what the income requirements of HPDs are. And then the same thing with HUD, housing urban development. So there's policy within HUD that plays a role in what happens in NYCHA. So then they say, oh, well, this is what HUD says are the requirements, so there's not much you can do. I think those are the things we also have to look at as well. COTs, I disapprove with that COT because of that. Because why are you going to have a lottery system? Because that means you just change the way things look, and you providing the same type of housing. Like I've seen over 15 projects, and more, probably like 3 projects are close to being affordable to us, and the rest are like over 60 to 120 area median income. So things like that. That's what I could say from my experience. No,
Cesar,
yeah, policy is important.
Oh,
go ahead.
Those are really important. And so this is a perfect example of how sometimes a solution to a problem becomes co-opted and creates another problem. So a lottery, for example, was created to get around housing discrimination, right? So the idea is if you have a lottery and on paper people qualify, then it can't be like, oh, somebody's just running this and all their cousins or all their friends or pay them off and they get apartments. Okay, but the issue of community preference, the issue of income level is crucial, because if you are saying that the income level has to be this high, that a majority of people in the community don't qualify, that's another form of discrimination, because the city is refusing to put in the money to renovate those properties, and that's why it's so expensive. And I'll give you an example. In East Harlem, with the Community Land Trust, there are 4 buildings we got from the city, 16 apartments occupied, 16 vacant. So the people that are living in the apartments get Section 8 vouchers if they qualify for Section 8. We were demanding that all 36 units should get a Section 8 voucher. They said they didn't have enough. The city used to, with these vacant city-owned buildings, renovate them. The city would pay for the renovation. So you could buy your apartment for $250, form a low-income co-op, and you didn't carry any debt. Now the city, without consulting with anybody in the community, they created a program called the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program. And instead of buying your apartment for $250, it went up to $2,500, just like that. Then they said, well, we're not going to pay for the renovations anymore. The developer has to answer a request for proposal, and they have to get underwriting. They have to borrow the money, and then the debt is passed on to the tenants. So with the project in East Harlem, the existing tenants get Section 8. The new people coming in are at 60% of AMI. Maybe even went up to 80%, I'm not sure. So you're exactly right. They're using the affordable housing programs across the board, CLTs or not, to gentrify the neighborhoods, because most people in the community are not going to qualify for that. There used to be a policy for these low-income co-ops that tenants fought for and won, that if I go in there with my sweat equity and work on fixing up my apartment rather than have contractors do it, then every hour of my labor valued $10, and that could go towards the purchase of my apartment. That was an HPD policy. You can Google HPD sweat equity, and that law was changed. So what we're doing is we're actually losing victories that past tenants have organized and won. And so I think it's really important, the political education around what people have already fought for and won in New York, and what works and what we need to hold on to or bring back. But the problem with the high rents and the financing is all because HPD stopped putting money into housing for low-income people. And they expect these developers, even if they're well-intentioned developers, they have to borrow the money, and then they have to show the bank how it's going to get paid back before they can get the loan.
Danny Barber has his hand raised. So Danny, if you can go and ask your question, and then after that, we'll have closing words from our panelists, and then we'll have Satches and Marcus close this out. Danny?
Good evening, everybody. And John Rea, there was a case, Almeida versus Rea, where John Rea was sued for forcing residents to downsize apartments. You see you shaking your head. I think you know the lawsuit. So in that settlement, it stated that if a resident had a 3-bedroom apartment and there were 2 people on that lease and there was 1 extra room, the housing authority could ask you to downsize. They couldn't force you. But if you lived in a 3-bedroom apartment and it was you by yourself and you had those 2 extra rooms, they could make you downsize. That was the outcome of the solution. Then it also went on to state that about being able to add people to the lease, that they had to carefully look at it to add them to the lease. And they couldn't just tell you, as they do, that, oh no, you can't add anyone to the lease, you live in this apartment and it's not the right size. So what you're saying, things that were working, these are things that I give residents, and I fight for residents still in management offices, and they're allowed to keep that extra bedroom without being forced to downsize. So I have that document. I'll share it with Althea, and then she can pass it around to everyone else. So if it can help, it can help them out.
Well, just so everybody know, that's Mr. Danny Barber. He's the CCOP chair for NYCHA and throughout the city. So he's very, very knowledgeable. So thank you for sharing that information. And if you get it over to me, I will definitely get it out to the people. So just before if we could have some closing remarks from both Lynn and Afua, and then Mr. Satches Marcus, he's going to close us out. So Afua, if you could start, since Lynn had started with the opening in the beginning.
So one, just want to thank you for having me here this evening, and so excited that we all got to just share some space and conversation together during what are some interesting times. And I'll keep it brief. I'm looking forward to working with Althea and hopefully so many of you. I'm trying to be like Marquise and be on the A team, and want to really look.
You were on the 18. You was one of the first people to endorse me.
Yeah. So looking forward to working with you and others to both build your campaign in the image that you're doing it with deep community investment and accountability. And since we're proclaiming it, once you're God willing victorious, to work with you to help organize some of your colleagues so that we can manifest some of these visions and dreams that we have for dignity and of renters and opportunities for home ownership and co-op ownership for working class Black and brown folks in the Bronx. So really excited to be on that journey with you, and looking forward to working with you.
I appreciate you, sister.
I'm grateful to be here. I appreciate meeting you, Althea, and sharing this time with everybody. And there are more working class people in New York City than there are higher income people. And I would say that if we are organized, we can win things that make our lives better. There are laws and policies and things that people born and passed away before we were even born have fought for and won. And I really hope that we can learn from those organizing histories in terms of housing movement in New York City, but also beyond. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. You know, other folks have had great ideas and done great things. And so taking the time to have these kind of conversations and do that kind of work, sometimes we're so busy that we feel like we don't have time to do that. But I would love to offer that I would love to be part of that with other folks, and to look at it in a big picture way, because what the system does is they make a bunch of different things, and then we spend all of our time creating a campaign to change one little thing, and the whole big picture, we're fixing one car on the train, and the train itself is already going somewhere that we don't even want to go. And so I'm a tenant. I'm willing to do whatever I can to support other folks get housing. Every homeless person used to be a tenant. And for those of us that are trying to keep a roof over our heads, that we stick together and we fight for what we need.
Well, thank you. I'm extremely grateful for you to be here tonight, and I'm excited because we will announce when we're doing our community walkthrough, and we can invite folks to come with us because it is definitely happening. I like the call, so I'm here for it. As soon as petitioning is over, let's schedule it so that it could be like early April.
All right.
And so, Marquise, could you please introduce the next guest?
Absolutely. It is my esteemed honor and pleasure to introduce a man I have walked and battled side by side with in the housing movement. You can't talk about housing justice or housing security without talking about those who are most vulnerable and facing housing security. And so Marcus Satches Moore is one of those leaders. He has battled homelessness, and he has taken up the fight, the call, and has been fighting on the ground. Satches Marcus Moore is a board member of Picture the Homeless, who writes, produces, and draws on his experience of being homeless. He constantly draws from the dialogue and demeanor of people he comes in contact with, as well as spaces he sits in to influence his craft. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Satches Marcus Moore.
Hello, everybody. Hello. What an introduction. I'm so humble. I'm so humble. And so, you got to excuse me. I forgot to do something really small, and it put me back. But however, I know folks been here from the start, so I don't want to take too much time, but I just want to give everybody a small example of what I've been up to and what I've been about throughout the year. So I am a board member at Picture the Homeless, and I'm overwhelmed to be here and just to be able to talk about housing issues. Housing issues are so much needed here in New York, and it's hard to believe that, it's almost like it's not really a priority, And so when we talk about homelessness, I definitely know about homelessness and how it has impacted me in my life as a man of color. You know what I'm saying? I always got, well, you need to go back to school and all this sort of stuff. But however, there's a lot of New Yorkers right now that's faced with issues such as the city felt voucher, and things of that nature is really impacting people like myself, and so, when we talk about homelessness, I have did a lot of things with people outside of United States, documentaries and just really writing on my experiences of homelessness. And I use the craft of satire or satirists to bring home issues that's dealing with people in the community. Sometimes, I got to put on a whole different outfit to really drive it home. Sometimes people don't really get it when you talk to them. Sometimes you gotta flash red and all types of shapes and colors for people to really understand what you're saying. And so I'm going to take us out here really quickly, ladies and gentlemen, with a small poem that I put together. And so if you can bear with me, it goes a little bit like this. When I think about reimagining housing, I think about living in shelters. Somebody need to tell the city and state that they need to put more money on city felt vouchers because I'm stuck. When I think about reimagining housing, I think about community, opportunity, education, employment, health, security, stability, and no more food insecurities. When I think about reimagining housing, I think about family, friends, holiday dinners, your house, my house. Ladies and gentlemen, Satches Marcus Moore, AKA the homeless poet. Thank you. And now,
thank you so much.
Yes.
Everybody give it up for Satches Marcus. Woo! We appreciate you. We appreciate you joining us. We appreciate you giving us that your time and your space. That was definitely a lovely poem. I'm happy you were able to share it because I definitely felt that. And before we get out of here, I did want to let people know, I know Afua just did talk about the A-Team, and we did want to give you guys some information on if you are interested in joining the A-Team, how you can join the A-Team. And the A-Team is just people who've been supporting this campaign. I think Siri put the information in the chat. Please feel free to reach out. I am very accessible, just so everyone knows. If you have any questions about tonight event, please feel to reach out, feedback. You can catch me on social media. I'm not really sure what this is. Please stop sharing it. It's the wrong thing. Yeah, so definitely feel free to reach out to me. And to be on the A-Team, you can go to my website, which is altheastevens4citycouncil.org. That number again is altheastevens4citycouncil.org. And my social media, all those are my social media handles. Petitioning is coming up on March 2nd. We are looking for canvassers and people who might want to come out and volunteer. So please hit us on any of the social media networks. And my email is also here, Althea. That is not my, that is althea@althea4citycouncil.org. You can reach out to me and my team will get back to you. I am very accessible. So if you have questions, input, please feel free to reach out to me. And I do not want to keep folks any longer because I know we are getting Zooms out these days because people are on Zoom all day. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate your time. I do not take your time for granted. And I appreciate all of you being here with me tonight and sharing this space and this time with me. So everyone, please have a blessed night and apparently bundle up because we get 8 inches of snow tomorrow. So I know I'm a snow bunny and I'm like, enough of the snow.
Yeah. Althea, peace and grace.
Please bundle up. Yes. Thank you so much, everybody. Be safe, be warm, be well.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.